Hey, Wayne here again. This is the last episode of a 5-part crime series I've been posting. They finally got it right. It took them long enough, but they finally got it right. And like I always say, your discretion is strongly advised. You don't want your kiddos watching it. And I'll get out of here and let you watch it in peace. Bye.
This is suspected serial killer Kenneth McDuff after tips led to his capture in Kansas City, Missouri. He now stands accused of killing at least 6 young women in Texas since his parole 3 years ago.
When I saw him getting off that plane, I thought, this is a relief. People are safe now.
McDuff was the epitome of evil. Everybody knew it.
This was a mean, mean man that should have never seen the light of day again. And he made a lot of people miserable. They will be that way to their dying days.
McDuff's alleged accomplice in the abduction of Colleen Reed from an Austin car wash last December says McDuff planned to kill the young woman after they sexually assaulted her. Reed's body has not been found. Last week, police found the body of 22-year-old Melissa Northrup in a southeast Dallas gravel pit. Police suspect McDuff abducted Northrup from the Waco convenience store in March, where she worked as a clerk.
No woman, no person should have to feel what those young women went through. My heart breaks for them all.
McDuff's the convicted murderer who in 1966 was sentenced to die in the Texas electric chair for the slayings of 3 Fort Worth teens.
He was given the death penalty, but it was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, commuted to life, and then he was paroled in 1989. Sources tell me that prison psychiatrists determined that McDuff was dangerous. And so tonight the question remains, why did the parole board turn Kenneth McDuff loose on society?
After a nationwide manhunt, serial killer Kenneth McDuff is arrested in Kansas City and brought back to Waco. It's there that U.S. Marshal Parnell McNamara challenges me to find out how this monster got out of prison. What Marshal McNamara didn't know is that I was already on the case. And he introduces me to prison investigator John Moriarty. Moriarty has McDuff's confidential prison files, and I've had sources leak to me McDuff's confidential parole files. Together, we're about to expose a level of corruption in the Texas parole system that no one could possibly imagine.
I'm out beating the bushes, trying to talk to parole staff, and I had found out the corruption was so deep in the parole system, run by parole board chairman James Granberry. Granberry had been the mayor of Lubbock years back. He had made a name for himself in Republican circles and ran for governor in 1974. He is rewarded for his work by Republican Governor Bill Clements. Clements names him to the parole board. He was selling his influence back with the other parole board members and all, and soliciting family members, claiming that he could get them out early on parole if they would just pay him.
There were lists that came out on releases about who was going to be released this week, that type of thing. Granberry would reach out to the individual whose family was on the outside and shake them down for a fee.
He was mailing letters to inmates' families that were scheduled to get out already. They didn't know it. This poor African-American woman who is working 3 jobs to support herself and support her family, her son is automatically going to be released, but they've targeted her. She gets a letter from Granberry telling her, I can get him out early, but it's $500. She pays the money. They were corrupt to the core that they had people working in the prisons everywhere finding these people to target. He was going back to his cronies on the board and getting them to approve the parole and spreading the money around.
During Granberry's investigation, we found that Granberry had received 2 vehicles from the father of a parolee for getting him released. When you look at the big picture, you know, you've got parole board members that are out there running amok, shaking down people for money. It was evident that they were selling paroles. And it's always cash, of course. I mean, there ain't no checks written for this kind of stuff. Dr. James Granberry would collect that money.
I interviewed Granberry about these allegations.
At least one inmate's family received a contract from Granberry with a bill for his consulting fee written on a parole board memo pad. Is that appropriate to be using your old memo pads?
I don't even have any of those anymore.
No?
But see, this just says board member.
Right.
Yeah.
How would they have that?
I don't have any idea.
They said you mailed it to. Came with some contractual stuff that explained you weren't an attorney, that you do you send out something like that?
Yeah, well, those few cases I did early on, yes, I did. Make sure that I'm not an attorney. Told I was not an attorney and that I certainly couldn't guarantee any results.
We're doing a deep dive into McDuff's file. We see that the attorney for McDuff, a guy named Jackson, and Granberry are friends. They grow up together. Another red flag.
Granberry actually called him while he was reviewing the file to decide how to vote. That's improper right there. He withdrew out of a conflict from voting on the case because of that relationship. But when there is a vote, it looks like McDuff's not going to get approved. Granberry steps in after recusing himself from voting earlier and casts the vote that lets McDuff out. McDuff gets in trouble when he's out on parole. He goes back to prison. Who steps back in to get him out? Granberry intervenes again. No one would ever know. They could never be held accountable because it was all hidden in the file. And I have that file when I interviewed James Granberry.
Thinks that you were set up. You stood between Kenneth McDuff and...
No, let's get this. I didn't approve his parole. I merely continued his parole planning. And there's a big difference.
But you could have stopped.
Honored.
You could see it on camera. Their mouth goes dry. I called it cotton mouth.
Everybody else had already voted. Their vote was
Henry
set.
King.
He's lying through his teeth.
I guess I could if I'd voted the other way. We could have stopped it.
I owned the interview then because I knew more about him and what he had done than he could even remember. Finally, I put it to Granberry. How could you override the other parole board members and set this monster free?
But I don't have a crystal ball, and I didn't know what the fellow was going to do. In my opinion, he was he'd be a useful citizen.
Granberry had said that he voted to release McDuff, that he was a model prisoner. Well, here in the file, buried in the file, McDuff earlier had attempted to bribe a commissioner in the parole system, had told him there's $10,000 can be in the glove box of your car. My dad's got money. Just vote me out. It's all in the file, and that file becomes their undoing.
McDuff had a reputation here.
Then I started releasing my investigative reports on television night after night, for week after week. And the stories were so shocking that there would be this level of corruption in the system. It was an earthquake across the state of Texas in law enforcement, in the public, certainly in the legislature.
Texas Senator Ted Lyon, who chairs the Criminal Justice Committee, plans to launch an investigation into why the parole board freed Kenneth McDuff.
Senator Lyon, in the wake of my investigative reports, he called a hearing and summoned Granberry to testify.
We know Granberry voted to let McDuff out after the first capital murder convictions. That whole system back then was just corrupt as it could be. I had no idea what was going to come out of that hearing. I didn't know what they were going to say.
Have you been helped by any of the staff at the Board of Pardons and Paroles in obtaining information on clients or potential clients in order to solicit them to pay you money to help get them out of prison?
I instruct Mr. Granberry to assert his privilege.
Granberry refused to answer the committee members' questions a total of 16 times.
It set a record in the state for the number of times that James Granberry took the fifth against self-incrimination.
Granberry had an opportunity to tell his side. This guy was the chairman of the Texas Parole Board. People needed to know what was going on, what happened, how did this happen? And he chose not to tell it.
What was always shocking to me is here's the guy that had run for governor of Texas. He had plenty of money. And then he set up this cheap way to make money off these people's family to help murderers and rapists get out of prison. Why he ever did that, I don't know. I mean, you have to be really desperate to do that.
Heartless, no ethics, no morals. How could he do that? How could any of them take money and release someone who may well have victimized one of their children or grandchildren? How could you do that?
The Criminal Justice Committee set up a long table in the center aisle of the Senate chamber. Parole board members who had voted on the McDuff case were also summoned before Lyons Committee. One of them, Cora Mosley, admitted that she voted for him and didn't even open the file.
And the question that I have is, and I want to make sure that this is very clear, there is an absolute possibility that you didn't even review this file.
There's a possibility.
Lori Bible, who had become this champion for her murdered sister. There was this moment in the hearing that she sat down beside Cora Mosley.
And I said, "Is that my sister's blood on your hands?" And her head did a swivel, and she looked at me, and she got out of that chair so fast.
And law enforcement all were sitting all around there. They all wanted to get up and applaud. They were like, what a moment.
Anyone that put themselves in a position of authority and then failed to use the authority to protect us, they have destruction on their hands. They have the pieces and fragments and dripping remains of these lives that have been torn to pieces.
In January of 1993, 8 months after McDuff was arrested in Kansas City, he goes on trial for the capital murder of 22-year-old Melissa Northrop, the Waco convenience store clerk. Because of pre-trial publicity, the trial is moved from Waco to Houston. Public interest in the case is overwhelming, and the media coverage is massive.
That was the biggest news crowd that I had ever seen. There were cameras, there were people, you almost had to wade through it.
I was sent to cover this trial in Houston. There was a little bit of a media circus. Every morning, we would gather outside the courthouse. He'd walk across the street, and we'd all shout out our question.
Are you innocent, Mr. McDuff?
I'd like to get an impartial trial.
You think you can get a fair trial here?
Don't look like that with all this news media.
He looked like he didn't think he belonged there, and he was not happy to be there. But I never saw anything that looked like remorse.
It was a difficult case because no one saw MacDuff commit the murder. We had evidence that put him at the scene where Melissa Northrop was abducted, where her body and car were found. But nobody actually saw him do the crime. So it's a circumstantial case. We called Addie MacDuff, MacDuff's mother, as one of our first witnesses. She had given him a credit card, and that credit card was used in the quick pack where Melissa Northrop was kidnapped from. Addie MacDuff was just in total denial that he had done anything ever bad in his life. And society was just unjustly picking on her poor son.
And I hurt for them people, but my son didn't do it.
There have been a lot of accusations. They say your son is a serial murderer, that he's a cold-blooded killer, and that he would just kill people for the fun of it.
Well, if he's doing all that, I don't know how he went to school and made good grades. He'd been busy killing. He has never killed nobody.
MacDuff is just a piece of shit, in my opinion. And his mother is too. And his father is for not sitting him down and spanking him when he was younger. They allowed this to happen. So MacDuff's mother, father, and MacDuff can all kiss my ass. How's that?
It is a case rife with contradiction.
You know, they were defending him. He was defiant, his family was defiant, and his lawyers were on his behalf, condescending in some respects to the state's case. Oh, this is a bunch of junk.
And it is replete with judgments made not according to evidence, but according to prejudice and hatred of one man, Kenneth Allen MacDuff.
And I thought, oh my gosh, don't tell me he's going to get away with this.
In a trial, normally, a defendant is only tried for the crime that he is charged with. But there are exceptions to that.
You told people that evening that all...
We wanted to introduce the evidence of the kidnapping of Colleen Reed there in Austin so the jury can make the comparison. Alva Hank Worley was a witness to that and testified about it.
Worley was a star witness, and he recounts what happened.
It was brutally difficult to endure. My first thought was about the family members who were present.
This was evil beyond anything any of us could comprehend. What happened to Colleen is beyond our comprehension.
The most chilling thing was what I heard in court about Colleen Reed. When he picked her up and carried her to his car, and she was yelling, "Not me, not me, not me." And I thought, she knew at that moment that she had met her end. And I just never was able to shake that. I think the minute Kenneth MacDuff laid his hands on any of his victims, they knew what was going to come next. And they prayed for either freedom or they prayed to be taken immediately. Nothing good was going to follow.
MacDuff insists on taking the stand in his own defense and gives this rambling, almost cross-examination of himself, how he didn't do it, how he wasn't there. It was laughable. You could see through it so easily.
You don't always know about how a jury is reading things, but after the recess, all of the women had moved to the back of the jury box. They wanted to be as far away from him as they could possibly get. That was a pretty strong reaction of what they thought of him.
The jury comes back with the verdict in 4 hours.
The jury decided to find him guilty. We went to the punishment phase of the trial.
By now, Texas and more than 20 other states had reinstated the death penalty, following new guidelines set down by the U.S. Supreme Court allowing them to do so.
Even before deliberations started, McDuff told reporters he knew he would be sentenced to death.
Are you afraid? Oh, I guess they might be afraid to a certain extent.
Mr. McDuff, stand up, please, sir. A jury finding you guilty of the offense of capital murder. I assess your punishment at death by lethal injection. Have a seat, please, sir.
As he was sentenced, the mass murderer showed no emotion.
At that moment, Kenneth McDuff becomes the first man in Texas history to get 2 death sentences.
For the family of the victim in this case, convenience store clerk Melissa Northrup, there were tears of relief. Are you going to be there when he is executed?
I plan to be, if I'm still living.
Does this resolve a lot of things for you and your family?
Yes, it does.
As he's coming out of the courthouse afterwards, I said to him, "Okay, Kenneth, what now?"
I guess I'm gonna die, apparently. We all do, you know.
To McDuff, death was like folding your cards at a card game. It didn't mean that much. He was arrogant enough in his own monstrous way to think he probably would never die. Or certainly he wouldn't die at the hands of the state.
1 year later, McDuff stands trial for the capital murder of Colleen Reed. Now, there's a possibility of getting convicted of the death penalty again. The district attorney's office saw this as an insurance policy. If something happens to the Melissa Northrup conviction, if it gets overturned or something on appeal, we have a backstop. We're going to make sure this man meets his maker.
Their case is a tough case. It's about Colleen Reed, but they do not have her body.
They had Worley's statement and confession as a witness. They had found a hair sample in McDuff's car that could tie Colleen Reed to his car.
All that evidence sent to the DPS crime lab came back that the hair sample was likely Colleen's hair. There was a positive on her blood that was collected. That gave us that link to Colleen being inside the Thunderbird. And fortunately, the jury in that case felt that we had enough convincing evidence to positively put him there at the abduction of Colleen.
The jury deliberates 2.5 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Kenneth McDuff is once again sentenced to death.
You couldn't get enough death penalties on McDuff. If you could get 2, get 2. If you could get 10, get 10. Because he showed us what 3 capital murders did. They got him out.
He's being escorted by the bailiffs down the center aisle of the courtroom. Female reporters from television, they thought, oh my God, he's about to go after us.
I said, turn loose of me. Settle down.
And when he says, don't touch me, well, they grab on tighter.
This ain't necessary to be hanging on to.
Don't you want to be there?
McDuff's on death row. He became the poster boy for criminal justice reform in the state of Texas. A series of laws and reforms were pushed through called the McDuff laws. It went through fast because the public was so outraged. All the inmates that thought they were going to get out with minimum sentences, they suddenly all realized we're going to do time and a long time because of Kenneth McDuff. McDuff becomes the most hated and despised man in the prison system.
Once the McDuff story broke, Texas was engaging in the largest prison building binge in the history of the free world. Much of that is a result of what McDuff's story brought forth.
While McDuff languishes in prison, the nightmare for his victims' families continues. By 1998, 7 years after Regina Moore, Brenda Thompson, and Colleen Reed were murdered, their bodies have still not been found.
I don't think my parents ever got over what happened. I remember thinking, it's okay. Wherever she is, wherever her remains are, it's okay. I've come to terms with it.
From his prison cell, McDuff continues to maintain his innocence.
Is there any way to tell them where Colleen Reed is? They still haven't found her body. Is there any way to make amends?
First of all, I would have to know where it was at.
Did you ever kill anybody?
No.
Not even those kids back in 1966?
No.
As McDuff's execution date draws near, a female informant, close to the killer, offers to try to get him to reveal the locations of the bodies.
Lo and behold, when she got talking to McDuff, he had an exact recollection, to the foot, of where the location of Regina Moore and Brenda Thompson.
Investigators say they may have found the remains of a Waco woman abducted 7 years ago by notorious serial killer Kenneth McDuff. It's believed to be 21-year-old Regina Moore, who was last seen struggling in McDuff's car in 1991.
Brenda Thompson, the other one, was the young lady that he picked up. Yep, I believe this is the place. Right here. And so I had a stick and I poke it in the ground. It went down. There was a cavity or some unnatural void. So I got down on my hands and knees and I tried to see what that was in there. I pulled it up. I thought that might be an arm bone. And so we knew we had her. Brenda Thompson had been with McDuff when she tried to kick her way out of the truck he was in, and she didn't make it. And this is where she ended up. And that's how we found her. It felt good to accomplish it. It was part of the last chapter of such a sad, sad thing. McDuff didn't seem to have, for whatever reason, a big problem talking to the informant about the location of Regina Moore and Brenda Thompson. But he did not want to tell where Colleen Reed was. He said, "You all won't need me anymore if I tell you."
John Moriarty is spending 40 hours with McDuff trying to get any hint of where Colleen Reed's body might be so you could give some sort of relief to the family.
McDuff says he's got a toothache. Well, a bulb goes off with me. Well, I said, hey, let me see if I can help you out, but here's the deal. If I help you out, you need to tell us where Colleen's body is. He agrees to it. They fixed his tooth, he was happy, came down and then drew us a map and told us where he buried her.
He said she's near the Brazos River in Falls County. Between these roads, there's a big tree, and so many feet from there, we all converged on this site above the river.
We've got bulldozers and all sorts of things, and we're out there hours and hours and hours, and we're not getting anywhere. I had talked with McDuff about it, that, look, if we have trouble, you okay with coming out and showing us? Oh, yeah. And you got to understand, this guy's been locked up, you know, for 7 years, and he ain't going nowhere, but this is a field trip.
I had no earthly idea that you could take a person on death row who's due to be executed in like 2 weeks and put him in a vehicle and drive him away from the prison.
I get in the car with him one-on-one. I said, now we need to find the body. I said, you have entered into an agreement. Tell me what you remember when you brought her out here. And he said, I think it's going to be right in there somewhere. I mean, 2 passes with the tractor, and it popped up part of her skull.
That big cottonwood tree was where Colleen Reed was found.
Finding her to me was just a shock. I just couldn't believe we actually got her.
When they found her and found the remains, I said, thank God, bless them, they have the closure they needed. But she's still gone. She still suffered. You know, I realize as a grown man, there's a beginning and there's an end. But in the middle, you want to make sure you have popcorn in the movie. Colleen suffered. Colleen's death was terrible. And there was no need for anyone to die that way.
They had a team of forensic people, and they wanted to properly get her out.
We had a box, just a cardboard box, and we put her in there. Chuck said, we're not putting her in the trunk, and we're putting her inside the car.
I think she needs to ride in the car with everybody else.
So we put her in the car, and we came back to Austin.
I got the call that they had found what they believed to be Colleen. And then I found out that JW wouldn't just put Colleen in a box in the trunk. They wouldn't give up. They would not give up. I had made a promise to my parents, and the boys helped me live up to that promise. I mean, I didn't know where to go look for her. They did. And found her. And because of them, we got to bring her home.
Executions in Texas are carried out at the Walls Unit. It's in downtown Huntsville. It's this big red brick tall wall structure from the late 1800s, the oldest prison in the system. And when you leave prison, you leave from there. You either leave from the front door, or if it's an execution, you're leaving in a pine box made by inmates.
We went to see him, Charles Meyer and myself, 6, maybe 7 times over a period of time, just talking to him. We knew he was going to die the next day, so we were going to get one more shot at him. I remember asking him, I said, you know, Mac, they're going to kill you tomorrow. And he goes, no, they're not. And Chuck said, yeah, they are. It's going to happen. I said, well, let's just say they are. Now, we've not read you your rights. We're having a conversation. Why don't you just tell all? If there's any more out there, tell us where they're at. He said, no, that's just nobody else.
From what I hear, he is afraid of dying. What do you think he's afraid of?
Meeting his maker, who is the devil himself. I'd be afraid too.
Victims' families came to the death chamber to watch
the execution of the man who has ripped a dozen families apart.
The families of Robert Brand, the teenager that had been murdered in 1966, came. Melissa Northrop's family, they came. They wanted the assurance that this couldn't happen to anyone else.
I wanted to know he was dead. I wanted to know that McDuff would never, ever hurt anyone again. But watching McDuff die would not do anything for my grief, for my pain, or for my soul. So I chose not to witness it.
The one striking thing that day, there were no death penalty protesters. Usually there was always a large contingent of them. They didn't show up that day. They're like, this guy's worthy of getting the death penalty.
There's a team of several correctional officers, 5 or 6, that escort him. Very rarely do you see them being fought into that chamber. They don't want to look bad to the other inmates that are on death row. He's going to go out like a man. He's brought in to the room and strapped down onto the gurney. The warden is standing at the head of the bed, and the chaplain is standing at the foot of the bed with his hand on his leg. The warden's talking to him at the time. He asks him if he has anything that he wants to say, a statement to make.
The family of the victims are literally surrounding him, and he says nothing for them. His last words were, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." To the very end, he's self-centered and selfish and just a beast.
My cousin Mark, this is my Uncle Robert, and my future aunt.
For this Fort Worth family, the wait has been a long 32 years, and the pain immense to watch McDuff paroled in 1989 to murder and rape again.
Very unfair to the other victims. He should not have been released the first time. You don't release a triple murderer to go out and kill and kill and kill again.
McDuff was executed for the kidnapping and murder of Melissa Northrop, a mother who left 2 children behind.
I'll tell them that he was laying on a table. He had a needle in his arm. He went to sleep, and his heart stopped. And I will also tell them he died easily. He died nothing like your mother did.
I know that I never have to walk into another courtroom and look at him again. This part is over.
Hallelujah. God bless the young without mothers.
Colleen was Daddy's precious, darling, baby, angel girl.
God bless the child who suffers.
When Colleen was brought home back to Austin, it was important to me that the community have an opportunity to pay their respects and to say goodbye. The entire community had suffered for almost 7 years, not knowing where she was. And I couldn't think of anything better than to have the law enforcement officers escort her casket into the sanctuary for her funeral.
Lori Bible honored us more than she should have by allowing us to be pallbearers for her sister, Colleen. Maybe 6 or 7 of us carried her.
And we bring our gratitude to those whose caring pursuit of justice has made these healing moments possible.
The system let us down, and that caused us all a great deal of pain. But there is still honor. These people who believed in helping us find justice, the community needed to see them. Bring her home.
You know, the job was just done. There was a great satisfaction on my part to see the laws changed. Actually, good came out of all of this suffering. McDuff was supposed to go back to Rosebud to be buried there, and when the word got out, there was an outcry in Rosebud. McDuff was taken by inmates to a prison cemetery nearby. An anonymous marker on the grave that only has his death row number. There are psychopaths among us. You really need a way to keep them behind bars to protect the rest of us, because they prey on the innocent when they're freed to kill.